sitting on his front porch. I didn't think anything of it and went downstairs into the kitchen and made a peanut butter and
I am
fluff
building
sandwich.
the hospital now.
I would say I was in the kitchen for probably about 5 minutes or so, finishing eating and doing a few dishes.
In one of my towns.
When I finally sat down to play some games, I thought I heard something hit the front bay window, so I went to take a look. At first, I didn't see anything, but then noticed that Jacob had now turned the porch lights off and was standing on his front lawn, staring at the house with his head tilted like he was looking towards the windows upstairs.
As you can know,
I tried calling one of my friends who knew I was still in town to see if she wanted to meet up or stop over to hang out for a little bit.
This is kind of
She
based
didn't answer,
on
so
that.
I sat on the couch for a couple of moments trying to figure out what to do. He was still standing there staring and seemingly moving a few feet closer to our property each time I looked. I wasn't sure what to do.
The name
call the cops.
is...
He hadn't done anything except freak me out a little, and to this point, he hadn't
based on
stepped on
the
my property.
fucking
After another few minutes, I looked out the window again and saw Jacob now on our lawn looking at the corner of the house. At least that's what it looked like he was staring at.
This is the
At this point, I wasn't sure what his intentions were.
I'm building
I didn't want to find out. Perhaps I was blowing this out of proportion, but I was legitimately scared. I grabbed my keys and phone and a few other items, thinking I would just drive to campus. Maybe the library was still open, even though we were off for the holiday. I kept all the lights on so I didn't seem like I was leaving and decided I was going to sneak out the back door. As I quietly sneaked through the yard, I turned the corner to quickly get to my car, and there was Jacob, standing in our driveway. I asked him what he was doing in the driveway, and he put his finger over his mouth to make a shh noise. I slapped him as hard as I could and made a run for it past my car. My instincts and adrenaline told me to just run until I found someone or someplace else. As I got about a block or two down the road, I saw a bunch of cop cars pull up towards the area of my house. Confused, I began to go back towards my house, thinking perhaps another neighbor saw Jacob stalking outside of my house and called the police. As I approached the house, one of the officers asked my name and if this was my residence. I confirmed the information, and what I heard next is still the most horrifying and disturbing information I had ever received. The officer stated that Jacob reported that he was on his porch when he saw me from across the street. He saw me walk out of my upstairs bedroom, and as I walked away out of the room, he saw a man come out of my closet. Apparently that was why Jacob was looking into my room when I saw him the first time, and also why he was looking at the corner of the house. He was following the intruder who was now walking into my roommate's room. When I last saw him outside my house before I slapped him and ran in terror, Jacob stated that the random guy in my house had made it to the downstairs. Jacob was trying not to make any noise as not to alert the person inside, fearful he could be violent or dangerous. As soon as he saw the man in the house, Jacob called the authorities and did his best to try and defuse the situation and not bring any alarm to myself or the intruder. The person inside the house was arrested and taken away. He didn't have anything on him other than a knife, so it is unclear if he was attempting to rob the home or was planning something more sinister. Either way, I couldn't express to Jacob how much gratitude I had for what he did. He even tried apologizing for how he handled the situation, stating that there were probably things he could have done differently to make sure I was safe and aware of the situation. Unfortunately, this experience adds another mental scar to this time of year that will take a long time to get over. But one thing I can be sure of is that I will never...
Great ad. Fuck off, you piece of shit ad. No one cares about the
never spend a Thanksgiving holiday alone again. This incident occurred during my second year of college, sometime in the fall of 2002. All 4 years there, I worked as a waitress in a small family restaurant next to campus. The pay was far from adequate, but the owners treated me like one of them. Growing up without parents made this connection very important to me, so much so they remain an important part of my life to this day. I was one of 4 girls working nights, and 3 of us were students currently attending the university. The surrounding neighborhood had been on a downward slide for the past 20 years. Even with a large number of students inhabiting the area, crime crime was still steadily on the rise. In order to at least try to prevent ourselves from becoming victims of said crime, several safety measures were implemented. All the usual things, escorting each other to our cars, not leaving the back door open, things like that. However, no matter how hard you try to be safe, some a-hole will find a way to violate you anyway. One late night, just as we were wrapping up the dinner shift, a giant idiot would do just this and, in the process, almost cause a beautiful family to collapse. That night, we were quickly coming on the end of another regular dinner shift when a man came in and said he wanted to get something to go. No problem. I took his order and gave it to the kitchen. Working the kitchen that night was Matt, the owner's only son, and he wasn't happy when he saw it. He tried to throw it together as fast as possible so he could finish cleaning and head home. While he waited, the man paced nervously, looking outside repeatedly. This behavior seemed kind of shady, so I stopped my closing duties and began looking outside to see if I could see what he was looking at. It took a minute, but I caught sight of another man standing just out of view of the bay windows. This guy was dirty looking. His hair looked like it hadn't been washed or combed in years. The second man's actions were very similar to the others, almost as if though they were about to rob us. I foolishly pushed my instincts aside and began ringing up the man's orders. When I gave him the total, he quickly handed me a $20 bill and looked behind him. I continued to ignore his behavior, and when I opened the drawer, I heard a man's voice quietly tell me to give him all the money in the register. Maybe from instinct, I looked up to see who it was. It was all coming from the customer, and he was holding a handgun at my face. "Keep your voice down and don't panic. Just give me the money and I'll leave." This entire time I had been the only employee in the front of the house, so he had me at his mercy. Every word he said quivered as it came from his mouth. His fear made mine even worse. I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed every cent out of the drawer and was about to hand it to him when I heard Matt's voice coming from behind me. "Did you forget something?" Everything that happened after this went by so fast. I still question my recollection of events to this day. I know for sure that Matt's arrival surprised us both, but the look on the customer or robber's face was pure shock. The second I noticed him moving the gun away from my face, I crouched behind the podium to hide. The gunfire followed soon after that. I wasn't sure if Matt had been shot at this point. I was still curled up on the floor with my arms over my head, very similar to a child hiding under the covers in hopes the boogeyman will go away. I don't know how long I stayed like that. A few seconds, maybe. When I did peek out from my arms, all I saw was Matt's body laying motionless on the floor. Even then, I stayed where I was until I heard the voice of his mom yelling out to us. That's when I finally stood up to see the results. The shooter was gone, and money was scattered all over the floor from where I dropped it. Matt more than likely died immediately. At his feet, grilled chicken salad was scattered everywhere like the money. Matt's mom stormed out of the back. When she saw her only son lying on the floor, she collapsed in grief next to him, and this is where she stayed until the police arrived. Just to avoid making an already long story longer, I'll leave you with the facts. Even after telling the cops everything I saw and giving a detailed description of both men, neither man was caught. The family closed the restaurant for several days after the shooting and stayed that way until a few days after the funeral. From the day of the reopening, a cop in plain clothes has protected the place, and there hasn't ever been another holdup since. My work at the restaurant would continue for the remainder of my time at the university.
For the horses and
I was shaken up for quite a while, and may have been for far longer if it wasn't for the love and support of the family. We seem to have served as a coping mechanism for one another, and through the shared pain of Matt's death, brought closer together. After I graduated, I moved on and am currently living in Atlanta with my partner. The restaurant continues running 5 days a week and doing well. Seems the neighborhood may be on its way up. In the last year, several large companies have opened branches, and the continued growth has proved to be a positive thing for all concerned. Allison, the matriarch of the family, recently told me on a phone call that she was willing to put up with the hipsters that were slowly invading the area. After all, they were a big step up from the murdering crackheads that had been seen there before.
Do you remember as a kid, where you imagined dentists as some kind of crazy psychos who enjoy hurting people? So my tooth started to hurt a lot.
Fast forward. Here we are.
Open my mouth wide so that he could start the examination.
Fast forward.
One of which was 8 years old, while the other was only around 18 months. They were absolutely adorable and very well-behaved kids, but you could tell that they were going through a lot. And the older one definitely showed signs of stress over the whole thing. And I'll never forget the time he asked me why his daddy couldn't live with them anymore, and it honestly broke my heart. Not because I didn't have an answer for him, but because to hear it would have just been too much to bear. Too much for anyone to bear. Anyway, after a few months of being alone, she finally decided to get back on the old dating horse. I was so happy for her, after the father was so upset with the boy's death on him, until the day he died.
I told John.
This summer, flavour your adventure with Macca's. The new crispy barbecue McOz is here with 100% Aussie beef, juicy beetroot and crispy onions. Or try the new Aussie Angus burger with onion rings and bacon.
I live in a house compound, and one day me and my family were visiting a friend's house. After a couple of hours, my mom and my friend's mom asked us to go fetch something from my house. So we go back to my home, which is a long way from his, and the walk seemed uncomfortably long and creepy and had an eerie atmosphere for some reason. After ages of walking, we reach my house and we get the thing they needed, which was inside the house. So I unlocked the door and got the object. I noticed the bathroom door was lit, and the exhaust fan was on, which we usually turn off unless someone is using the toilet. But I didn't give that any attention, and thought my dad was using the toilet since he wasn't in my friend's house when we left. So me and my buddy decided to wait outside the house for my dad to finish, and I occasionally went to the small window outside the bathroom and called for my dad, but I didn't get an answer. But I heard someone humming and singing, so I thought that he was having a good time. After a good half an hour passed, I started feeling uneasy and told my friend we had to leave because our parents are probably angry now. When we arrived at his house, we were shocked to see my dad sitting and talking to my friend's parents. We asked him, "Where were you?" And he said, "I didn't go anywhere. I just stayed here since we first came." This made me scared because my family had been here for 3 hours, and we just waited for my dad for 1 hour. I go ask my sister the same question and get the same response. Someone was surely in my bathroom. After the visit is done, we go back home just to find the front door, which I locked and unlocked, and the bathroom door was wide open. My family acted normally, but I was completely freaking out, and I couldn't get any sleep that night. First and last time I babysat, back when I was 16 in the early 80s. I just got a driver's license and needed gas and insurance money for the old beat-up car I bought. I was watching two boys, about 6 and 10, while parents went out to celebrate some anniversary or something. They had promised to be home at 11. At the time, cell phones were pretty rare, so no way to contact them other than calling the restaurant. Evening was going great until about 9:30 when their large, aggressive Doberman goes crazy running around the house barking and growling before running into the basement, refusing to come up. Sort of freaks me out a bit because this dog is huge, aggressive, and very protective of the house and kids. I do a quick check of the house and kids and everyone was okay. I let the dog stay in the basement, put kids to bed at around 10 as instructed by the parents. Job done. So I'm watching TV at around 10:30 when suddenly I begin to smell something burning. Running into the youngest boy's room and find the oldest boy in bed with him. Both are asleep, so I wake them both and tell them that we need to get the dog and go outside. But the dog just straight up refuses to leave the basement. I had to prioritize. So I get the kids outside and tell them to sit in the front yard while I go in to call the fire department. Not showing good judgment here, but I was 16. Oldest says, I left a candle burning under my bed. As I go back in, yep, a candle under their bed, since apparently monsters couldn't live anywhere where there's light. I know, dumb kids. As I open the door to go back in, there's this huge explosion behind me across the street and power goes out. The kids start screaming and follow me back into the house. I grab the phone, but there's no dial tone. I get the kids out of the house again, onto the back porch this time and make it really clear that they're stay there. But I can still hear the dog whimpering in the basement. I run to the oldest kid's bedroom with the fire extinguisher and flashlight from the kitchen and look under the bed through hazy smoke. The offending candle has gone out, but has burnt a hole in the box spring, which also has gone out. I flip the box spring and blast it with the extinguisher just in case. I then run to the front porch to see the transformer on a telephone pole had exploded. A lightning pole... what? Lighting the pole on fire and taking out the phone and electricity service has burnt a hole in the box spring, which also has gone out. I flip the box spring and blast it with the extinguisher just in case. I then run to the front porch to see the transformer on a telephone pole had exploded. A lightning pole... what? Lighting the pole on fire and taking out the phone and electricity service for the street. I run and check on the box springs, which are still out. I open the bedroom windows to air out the room, then get the kids off the back porch into the living room onto the couch, where they both are just crying their eyes out. The oldest was apologizing for the fire, but insisted that if he didn't keep the candle lit, then, of course, monsters would get him. Fire department shows up for the transformer at around 11. Kids fall asleep on the couch at around midnight after watching the firemen across the street put out the transformer fire. The power comes back on at about 1:30 a.m. The parents show up at 2:30 a.m. when they were supposed to be back by 11. They're somewhat buzzed and start complaining that the kids are not in bed and the oldest room is trashed with a flipped over mattress and dry fire extinguisher powder covering the box springs. And to add insult to injury, they straight up refuse to pay me. The situation gets really tense and, would you believe it, the Doberman picks this time to come out of the basement and starts aggressively growling at me. Walked out with $1 to my name, and I never babysat again. For the longest time, I was a tombstone caretaker for a cemetery in rural Georgia. It was only a summertime job for a 16-year-old, nothing too crazy. Just cleaning off the grime and build up dirt from
ready for Halloween and egg their house, basically.
Now, to kind of set the scene a little, the cemetery included one building that housed bathrooms for the 5 caretakers employed by the cemetery, in addition to one small, simple mausoleum.
And toilet paper their house, too. Egg their house, and toilet paper their house.
The whole place felt pretty cut off, too, as surrounding the place were some of the densest forests in the entire state of Georgia. Naturally, because of the eerie surroundings, I was always a little bit more paranoid than maybe I should have been. That, and I watch a ton of horror movies and such, which I get is a terrible combo for someone working in a cemetery. So one night, I'm doing my rounds when I have to go into the small mausoleum. We had some of the wealthier families in the area entombed within, and it was my job to go in, make sure all was neat and clean, making sure it met the standards of these uppity folks. I'm walking over to it, and right off the bat, I feel like something is off. I couldn't quite put my finger on it at first, just this general sense that I wasn't alone. That's about the time that I noticed candlelight coming from the small mausoleum. I was also pretty certain that I could hear voices coming from inside too, like younger voices, kids my age at the time. They were giggling and laughing, and it didn't sound particularly wholesome. Now, I hadn't seen anyone enter or leave the cemetery, but I also wasn't about to potentially take on a bunch of drunk teenagers on my own, as I definitely would have got my butt whooped. So I called the lone security officer on duty, the dude that does a few rounds on the lot. He was an older, retired cop, but he was definitely tough, and I knew he'd jumped at the chance to help me out. When the ex-cop finally turns up, we both go inside. It was empty, which made absolutely no sense, as I'd literally just heard voices and stuff inside. And there were indeed lit candles inside, burning around one of the tombs,
room,
a tomb that had been opened up to reveal the remains of a child-sized skeleton. Nothing other than that was disturbed, but that was bad enough, mainly because the open tomb contained a rotten old child's doll, like the knitted kind. It was seriously disturbing to see that old thing smiling away whilst lying hand in hand with an actual kid skeleton. Me and the security guard quickly got out of there, doing a lightning sweep of the grounds to try to at least get eyes on these sick idiots that desecrated that girl's final resting place. Neither of us saw a soul, which was more frustrating than it was scary, and after about a quarter of an hour, we met back at the mausoleum to set the girl's grave in order by sliding the stone tablet back on top of the tomb. When we stepped inside, the doll that was previously hand in hand with the dead girl was sitting on the other side of the mausoleum, like just sat there, upright, with that same uneven smile. Stitched across her face. Whoever was messing with us had actually gone back to move that doll to taunt us. I quit the next day and never went back. Not even to
Don't worry about dinner. Let dinner come to you with DoorDash. Ordering is easy. Open the DoorDash app.
visit. Okay, so years ago, my dad purchased a cemetery when I was in middle school, and I worked for him through high school graduation. I did yard work, mowing, weeding, tended to flower beds, etc., and aside from the occasional shadows seen out of the corner of my eye or hearing strange sounds, the cemetery was actually quite a peaceful little place. But the strangest is when you have a burial in the crypts. Basically, you dig down about 5 or 6 feet to expose a giant pair of stone slab doors. You pull the stone doors off and then drop down into a tiny, cold, dark room. These rooms can either fit 2 full-size coffins, 4 children's coffins, by far the hardest to deal with, or years and years worth of cremated remains. So back in the 50s and 60s, families would purchase one crypt and the entire family tree would be cremated and interred inside it. Some just put the cremated remains in it and closed it up, but others lit candles and leave mementos, flowers and souvenirs, pictures and stuff like that. It's really creepy opening up one of those things after like 50+ years and finding all kinds of melted candles and old pictures of the deceased people inside. Not only that, but when you hop down in there enough times, eventually you have a weird realization that you are at the same level and completely surrounded by bodies. And that, one day, inevitably, you're going to be joining them. Another time, my best friend and I were earning a little money over summer at the cemetery, working as groundskeepers when we were juniors and seniors. It was easy money. We got paid $5 an hour, mostly for edging or trimming and generally keeping the whole place nice and tidy. We raked a lot of leaves and dug a lot of holes that summer, but we also got to tear around the grounds in what was basically a souped-up golf cart with our tools in the back. There was a lot of dead flowers to dig up, not to mention a lot of empty liquor bottles, beer cans, and unfortunately, on occasion, even some used condoms. There was a widow who left scribbled notes on her husband's grave, almost all of them completely illegible. Also a lot of sodden stuffed animals left on the graves of children. It felt so wrong throwing that stuff in the trash, and take my word on it that it sucked even harder than digging holes.
This is supposed to be the beeping machine. You know that machine where,
it was truly a gravy job.
You know, your heart monitor basically.
The creepiest thing I saw was one of the old-style baby dolls that had been left on a graveyard.
Yeah.
Not inherently spooky, I know, but what creeped us out was the fact that it was badly burned. Almost like someone had gone over it with a blowtorch or something. Not just that, either. It had what we discovered to be these big iron nails that had been driven into the spaces its eyes should have been. Probably just some local college kids playing a prank or something. Heck, it could have been my buddy, but he never admitted to it. It just really creeped me out to see that thing one early morning, when there wasn't another soul in sight. Having said that, there was something far, far worse I encountered while doing that job. It was the naked corpse of a young woman my age, left neatly with her arms at her sides one foggy Saturday morning. She had been strangled right there. Whoever murdered her had also bludgeoned her horribly. She was identified quickly, and it turned out that she was a student at a neighboring high school, but her clothes were never found, and to my knowledge, her murder was never, ever solved. My friend and I were grilled by police on 2 separate occasions, and honestly, I think that was the scariest part, knowing we were actually implicated in the murder. But we didn't know a thing, and we each had alibis, so thankfully we were eventually rolled out, and thankfully, the cops never bothered us anymore. I just pray that she's resting in peace. Former funeral director here. A bit of a setup first. The cemetery I run is real old, like by a good few hundred years. At least it must be, since the church next to it was constructed during the 17th century. Considering the fact that it is a pretty rural place as well, most people back in the day were buried with only wooden crosses and such, no stone or marble. So as time goes on, crosses rot and wither away, new people get buried, etc. Nowadays, due to less people living out here in the sticks, which means our budget is increasingly limited, the cemetery is really run down and overgrown. It is a really pretty place, and it's honestly pretty depressing. So as some of you can imagine, when you keep burying bodies in the same small patch of dirt for that many centuries, eventually the soil has been worked over dozens and dozens of times. So in the end, it consists of mainly bone meal. You can't even rake over the flower beds there without accidentally uncovering some teeth or finger bones or something equally grim. It's nothing but fragmented skeletons all the way down into the thin turf. The soil sort of resembles the kind of dirt you see near sandy beaches, except on closer examination, all the light-colored parts are just bone fragments rather than crushed seashells. Not really scary or unexpected, just super eerie until you eventually get used to it. You learn to treat anything recognizable as human remains with respect and just tuck it away out of sight under the plant or whatever else you were putting there. Anyway, so someone was taking care of their relative's grave and decided to expand the area around the grave. For some reason, the people around here are not particularly fond of grass, rather preferring a well-leveled ground with Zen garden lines made with a rake. The person removed the grass and was sprucing up the place with a rake when they pulled up a bunch of snow-white hair from the dirt. They must have just freaked out and ran out of there, leaving the cemetery attendant to stumble across what was essentially hair coming out of the ground. She reported it to the church, and supposedly they reburied the remains. Even with all my years as an undertaker, I'm not entirely sure how there could have been a body so close to the surface. But there's another incident that sticks with me even more than that one. My business partner and I had just got back to the funeral home from a call for a 27-year-old woman who tragically passed away due to terminal cancer. As we were moving her body from the cot to an embalming table, we heard an audible click.
You know what I mean?
The radio across the room turned on full volume static. It's one of those old radios you turn the volume dial until it clicks to turn it on. We both looked at each other, pale as ghosts. He happened to be extremely religious, and this event visibly shook him.
And
They
then
found an excuse to leave early
another
not long after the incident. So I shut the radio off as I typically use my iPhone to listen to music while doing embalming work. When I finished the procedure and was attempting to move her from the embalming table to a dressing table, I heard that click from the old radio and it turned on full volume yet again.
two TV
At this point, I was fairly freaked out and got out of there not long after. My partner and I never spoke of it again. Nothing like that had ever occurred to my knowledge before or after. So this happened back in 6th grade, and I think it's the closest I've ever come to dying. At the school I went to, we always used to have some big end-of-the-year field trip. We'd usually go to some city and look at all the important or historic buildings, have lunch, learn some things, and leave. That year, we were going to New York, and me and a couple of friends planned what we wanted to do. We wanted to go do our own thing, go shopping, get some new clothes, that kind of thing. Only when we got to school the next day, the teachers made it really clear we had to stick with the group. But since we were all stupid, rebellious 6th graders, we decided we'd just have to work around that. On the ride to New York, me, my friend Olivia, and my friend Devin decided we were going to leave the group and do whatever we wanted. Our class was pretty big, almost 60 of us, because they put 5th, 6th, and 7th graders together. So we thought if we weren't gone too long, nobody would notice. We had brought money, we had planned on buying tons of stuff, because even though we were a big class, we lived in a small town with only a couple of stores. Olivia loved shopping, and she had actually researched the area we were going to be around and picked out all the good stores. She even made us a little map. She was good at that kind of stuff.
In a minute, I'll go into the real
When we
world.
got to New York, Devin chickened out because his parents were pretty strict, and he didn't want to get his phone taken away again.
Let's have
Olivia and I
another
just
joint.
decided that he could just give us some money, and we'd buy his stuff for him. So we did that, and after they herded everyone off the bus, we kind of lingered back. We were right about them being distracted by everyone else because we got away, no problem. Olivia's map worked out pretty good, and we were gone probably around 10 or 20 minutes before things started getting crazy. We had just left the store, and Olivia was carrying her shopping bags when this guy noticed us. It probably wasn't hard to pick us out. Two little 6th graders walking around alone, carrying a ton of clothes. He started calling out to us, saying how he could buy us more clothes, all the jewelry we wanted, and if only we would just come with him. We didn't believe him, of course. We just kept walking, heading on to the next store. This guy wouldn't stop talking. He started following us now, and getting kind of angry that we wouldn't answer him. I told him to buzz off because I thought that he would take a hint. There were tons of people around, and we figured he couldn't really kidnap us in front of 200 people. But he kept following us, and he started getting a lot closer. He had probably been 30 or 40 yards back, where we could barely see him over the people, but now he was only 15 or 20 feet. And that's when we started panicking, because God was a potential kidnapper after us, and we had no idea where the group was. We decided to split off from the sidewalk and head down into some alley because we figured people would call out the guy if he started following us. But of course, it was New York, and everybody else was wrapped up in their own little problems. So now we're walking down this dark alley, and this guy is still after us. He fell a little back, probably back to about 30 feet now, but now he's not pretending to be a good guy. He's talking about how he's going to kill us, and how they're never going to find our bodies, and how much fun he's going to have with us. He's smiling this deranged grin the whole time.
And a
We're both on
killer.
the verge of tears now, because we figured
And a
this
rapist,
sociopath is
pretty
about to
much.
have his way with us.
Probably.
Olivia just decides to drop her stuff and yells, "Run!" So we both start booking it. And we're probably around halfway through
Most
this alley.
likely he's a
And then she turns
pedophile,
around and
rapist,
she screams.
all those
So I turn
shit.
around and I see this psychopath is now
Yeah.
running after us too. And he has a knife. We're both screaming now. And I'm running faster than I ever have before. And we just run out of the alley back into this crowd of people. And as we try to get into this group of people to make sure this guy can't stab us to death, I turn around and he's just standing back in the alley, smiling. And I turn back around and this random lady is asking us what's wrong because we're both sobbing and Olivia's dress is ripped and I'm bleeding because my arm scraped the wall. and we're crying so hard we can barely talk. As soon as we can actually manage to talk, we tell her about our school, and she looks it up and calls them, and we somehow manage to find our group again. We're both forced to stay right next to the teacher because they don't trust us anymore, and I honestly don't blame them. We didn't even tell them about the man, though. And as soon as I get home, I'm grounded, and my phone is taken away. But still, nobody but me and Olivia knows about that man. School ends a couple of days later, and I get my phone back, so I text Olivia, and she sends me a picture of our class in front of some important building, and says, "Look in the bottom left corner." And that man is in it, mostly hidden behind some wall, but you can still see his face, smiling that deranged grin for the camera. We never really talked about the man again. I didn't want to bring it up, and Olivia didn't either. I'm terrified of cities now. I like to stick to a couple of towns near me, and that's it. There's a much lower chance of...
Up here, like up the top, here is going to be a surgery room. Like, you know what I mean? Surgery.
Any psychopaths.
The
This
surgery
happened to me
room.
when I was in first grade, so about 6 or 7 years old. I'm now in my mid-20s. Every year, the first graders take a trip to the zoo, about an hour away from our town. I was a shy little girl, so I spent most of the bus ride staring out the window while the other kids were busy conversing with each other. A Jeep pulls up where I have a clear look into the vehicle and at the driver. We were on the interstate. I'm seeing him playing with something under his shirt, all the while looking at me and then back at the road, back at me and so forth. One hand on the wheel and the other fiddling with whatever was under his shirt. I couldn't keep my eyes off him,
definitely.
fascinated about what he was hiding. Then he lifted his shirt, and yep, I got a good look at what he was playing with the whole time. He freaking waved at me. Granted, I was a little girl and had never seen one before, nor did I understand why he was doing what he was doing. A girl that was near me asked what I was looking at, and then she got to see for herself. She started hollering, and I swear to God, all the kids on the bus ran to the window to see what was going on. The Jeep gunned off, and I'm sure it got off the next exit. I remember telling my mom about it when I got home, but then I just sort of blocked it out of my mind. It was only several years later, when I had 2 daughters of my own, that I recalled this event. And just last night, I was talking to my mom about it, wishing that I had been more mature and had thought to get his license plate number or something. All I remember is that it was a Jeep or SUV of some type and some middle-aged white guy. I just hope and pray to God that I, nor any other child in their life, ever has to go through or see something like that again. When I was in high school, my 2 closest friends were Colin and Eric. They were both tallish, skinny guys. I was a small young woman who, as a 16-year-old, could pass for 13. One night we went for a walk. Well, I was walking and the 2 guys were rollerblading slowly along. To get to my home, we went through the middle school parking lot. The lot was at the front of the school, and a row of trees separated the lot and the road. Just as we entered the lot, conversation broke as Eric and Colin decided to race to the end. They took off. As I was walking, a car pulled into the lot and slowly drove up beside me. It was about 10 o'clock at night, but the lights on the front of the school meant I could see the car pretty clearly. It was navy blue, and its black windows were tinted dark. There were no decals or anything on it, nothing that said security or neighborhood watch. The driver was a Caucasian man, probably in his late 20s. He didn't look overweight, but his face was wide and looked a bit swollen or something. He was wearing a red shirt, no uniform. He rolled down his window and spoke to me. "Hey, you're not allowed to be here. You're trespassing." I was confused. I stopped walking and took a small step toward the car to hear him better. Pardon me? I'm going to have to take you downtown. Get in the car." Now, it was pretty clear this guy wasn't security or a cop, so I immediately put more distance between myself and the car. In a loud, firm voice, I said, "No." The driver looked confused at that. I glanced towards the end of the parking lot. Eric and Colin had seen the car and were skating back quickly. He tried again. "You're in a lot of trouble. Get in the car." "No." At that moment, Colin and Eric reached me. I think one of them asked the driver who he is. The guy didn't say a word and just pulled away quickly. We all three discussed how creepy that was as we continued our walk. When I got home and said goodbye to the guys, I went inside and told my mom about the incident. She thought I was overreacting. I found the non-emergency number for police and gave them a call. They told me that the middle school did have a security officer there, but there was no reason that he would have had any right to ask me to get inside of his car. I have grapheme to color synesthesia, which gives me a very good memory for numbers and letters. I remembered the driver's license plate and told the police, but I'm not sure if anything came of it. I moved into a large studio apartment complex a few months ago. I am a single female with a 2-year-old daughter. My sister and a few of her friends came over about 3 weeks ago to hang out, have some beers, and play Cards Against Humanity. My studio has an enclosed patio, save for a door-size opening. No gate or door. Since my child was sleeping, I had everyone chill outside on the patio. We were having a great time, joking, talking, and listening to low-playing music, when the security guard entered my patio. "Hi there. Are we being too loud? Has someone placed a complaint?" No, you guys are fine. Just doing my rounds." He lingered for a minute more, then strolled out into the night. We continued our activities and didn't really give him a second thought. He returned about 25 minutes later, right after most of the group had left. Only my sister, her friend Cody, and I remained. He was an overweight, late 40s to early 50s white male and wore glasses. He strolls into my patio once again and strikes up conversation. We learned he is a retired cop that had quit the force after suffering a heart attack on duty. He states he had to undergo a quintuple bypass surgery, and after recovery, he started night security jobs. I felt sorry for him because of his medical history, and sat and listened to him for quite a while. He must have stayed at least 30 minutes before my sister got uncomfortable, and loudly announced that we were going to bed. He bid us good night and left. Once again, my sister said that she didn't like the way that he was looking at me, and she thought that he took a liking to me. I initially told her she was reading into it too much, and that the dude was just lonely and had a long shift ahead. A week and a half later, my sister was visiting again, and we are sitting inside my place talking. My studio has a black screen door, which is visible to see through, and a wood door. I had the screen locked and the wood door wide open to let some air in. My sister is talking to me, and I have the sensation that someone is looking at me, so I glance up. The security guard is standing at the doorway of my patio, staring. I say hello, and he jerks forward, as if expecting an invitation in or something. But I turn my attention back to my sister, and when I glance back again, he's gone. This week on Tuesday, I took a shower and threw on my red silk Japanese-style robe. I was washing dishes for about 25 minutes and had poured a glass of wine. I turned from the kitchen to sit on my couch, and I strangled a scream. The security guard is almost pressed up against my screen door, staring straight at me through the foot-long crack of the wooden door. I was so startled and shaken, but the first thing I did was make sure my robe wasn't exposing me. I ran up to the screen. What are you doing? You scared me." No emotion, no apology. I was just doing my rounds. One could take it.
Now, one person's life has changed forever. The Sydney Mum has picked up the entire $107 million.
Whatever. This one.
Just to state a couple things before this starts, these entries are all written by the same person. There will be a transition on screen between each story. I wasn't sure where else to post these stories, so I figured I'd share them here. I've been a search and rescue officer for a few years now, and along the way I've seen some things that I think you guys will be interested in. I have a pretty good track record for finding missing people. Most of the time they just wander off the path or slip down a small cliff and they can't find their way back. The majority of them have heard the old "stay where you are" thing and they don't wander off, but I've had 2 cases where that didn't happen. Both bother me a lot, and I use them as motivation to search even harder on the missing persons cases I get called on. The first was a little boy who was out berry picking with his parents. He and his sister were together, and both of them went missing around the same time. Their parents lost sight of them for a few seconds, and in that time, both the kids apparently wandered off. When their parents couldn't find them, they called us, and we came out to search the area. We found the daughter pretty quickly, and when we asked her where her brother was, she told us that he'd been taken away by the bear man. She said he gave her berries and told her to stay quiet, that he wanted to play with her brother for a while, and that's the last she saw of her brother. He was riding on the shoulders of the bear man and seemed calm. Of course, our first thought was abduction, but we never found a trace of another human being in the area. The little girl was also insistent that he wasn't a normal man, but that he was tall and covered in hair like a bear, and that he had a weird face. We searched the area for weeks. It was one of the longest calls I've ever been on, but we never found a single trace of that kid. The other was a young woman who was out hiking with her mom and grandpa. According to the mother, her daughter had climbed up a tree to get a better view of the forest, and she'd never come back down. They waited at the base of the tree for hours, calling her name before they called for help. Again, we searched everywhere, and we never found a trace of her. I have no idea where she could have possibly gone, because neither her mother or grandpa saw her come down. A few times, I've been out on my own searching with a canine, and they've tried to lead me straight up cliffs. Not hills, not even rock faces. Straight, sheer cliffs with no possible handholds. It's always baffling, and in those cases, we usually find the person on the other side of the cliff, or miles away from where the canine had led us. I'm sure there's an explanation, but it's sort of strange. One particularly sad case involved the recovery of a body. A 9-year-old girl fell down an embankment and got impaled on a dead tree at the base. It was a complete freak accident, but I'll never forget the sound her mother made when we told her what happened. She saw the body bag being loaded into an ambulance, and she let out the most haunting, heartbroken wail I've ever heard. It was like her whole life was crashing down around her, and a part of her had died with her daughter. I heard from another search and rescue officer that she killed herself a few weeks after it happened. She couldn't live with the loss of her daughter. I was teamed up with another search and rescue officer because we'd received multiple reports of bears in the area. We were looking for a guy who hadn't come home from a climbing trip